Hey everybody, it's Steve Van Tassel here for Dynasty Owner. And we are talking about, we've got our week 9 preview this week. And week 9, we're getting on the second half of the season. And it was an interesting week in the NFL, especially on Wednesday. Wednesday had a lot of news. And if you don't remember by now, because that was a couple of days ago, first thing, well, in order, sort of, I think the first thing that happened was that Michael Thomas declared himself out for the rest of the 2021 season, which was probably a surprise to a lot of his fantasy football and dynasty owners. And then there was the announcement that Aaron Rodgers was going to be on the COVID-19 list because he had contracted COVID and wouldn't be starting against Kansas City this week. Then there was the news about how fast Henry Ruggs unfortunately was going when he crashed his car and killed a woman. Which is sad news. But that happened. The announcement of the speed and everything. And then the final thing that happened was that Odell Beckham Jr. was kind of dismissed from practice by the Browns, which led to a couple of days later. Basically, he's going to get released. It's just a question of when. It's not an if now, it's a when. And so it was quite an interesting day. And so that got me thinking about certain things about Dynasty Owner, how, since it's sort of more like the NFL because we've got contracts and real salaries, sort of like, and a salary cap. So you can't just fit everybody you want in. The question is, it's called unwanted players. And it's kind of like how to get rid your roster of an unwanted player. And so these are sort of four different things four different players and four sort of different strategies that I think you need to use for that. So let's get down to brass tacks and talk about this topic. And we'll see what the advice is for how to deal with that unwanted player. So here's the ways you can get rid of an unwanted player in Dynasty Owner. I mean, you can trade him. That's pretty obvious, but some of these guys nobody wants, so you're not going to get anything for them. The second way is you can drop them, and you can pay the 25% drop fee. Depending on how much of his contract is left, that can be a lot of money. Can be a little bit of money. In the Ruggs instance, his salary, because he was released by the Raiders and he became a free agent, his salary is a little over $4 million, so the drop fee is going to be a little over $1 million. But for somebody like Michael Thomas, whose contract is $19.25 million and has 4 years left on it, so that's $77 million, you're going to be paying over $19 million for the pleasure of dropping him from your roster. So in that situation, what you can do is you can use an amnesty provision. That's something that's unique to Dynasty Owner, obviously not needed in leagues that don't use real NFL salaries and a salary cap. And it's something similar to what they used to have in the NBA back in between like 2005 and 2015. And so, basically, what is an amnesty provision? And the best example I can give, partially because I play a lot of Monopoly with my son now, is that it's kind of like the get out of jail free card. This is an old one, but you have a problem, you don't like the contract, you don't want the player anymore, use your amnesty provision. But it's not unlimited. You don't get as many of them as you want. You get one amnesty provision for your inaugural season. And then additional amnesty provisions can be purchased for $5 million Dynasty dollars. But if you think about it, you're spending $5 million to get rid of a guy who might cost you $10 or more million to get rid of. In the case of Thomas, that would be like $19.25 million to get rid of him. So it's a good thing to have in case you have one of those contracts. You take a chance on an expensive player and he doesn't pan out, you can get rid of him. So that's it. So that's sort of the preview of it. So now let's get into the usual stuff, which is the guys who should be in your starting lineup this week. And first, we always recap the previous week's starters. And last week, I recommended that you start Teddy Bridgewater, Samjay Pirine from the Cincinnati Bengals, Jamal Agnew, the wide receiver from Jacksonville, and Pat Freiermuth from the Steelers. And it was actually a pretty good week. Two of those predictions were good, Agnew and Freiermuth. Teddy Bridgewater, even though his points were kind of low, He only had 16.7 dynasty owner fantasy points. That was just okay because scoring was kind of down, and he was about QB 17. He was actually tied with Patrick Mahomes this week. And the only real bad recommendations was P. Ryan, in that I thought he'd get a little more. I thought the Bengals would beat the Jets and probably blow them out, and so that he'd get some garbage time rushes like running backs did the previous week against the Jets. That didn't happen. The Jets actually won the game, and so he didn't get many chances and was not a good person to having your starting lineup. So on to week 9. Let's figure out who we're going to have starting recommendations. And the first one is Tyrod Taylor, the quarterback of the Houston Texans. He was renamed the quarterback for the Houston Texans this week. And he didn't play bad when he was the starter. In week 1, he had 29.5 dynasty owner fantasy points. And then in week 2, in only one half of a game, he had 19.7 dynasty owner fantasy points. So he was playing pretty good through the first game and a half. And the other reason for having Taylor on this list is that they're playing the Dolphins defense, and you can check all the stats I put in the article, but pretty much they are a dreadful defense, so allowing a lot of fantasy points to quarterbacks. The second player to start having your starting lineup is Boston Scott, the running back from Philadelphia. Last week, he had 2 touchdowns. He had 60 yards, 2 touchdowns, 18 dynasty owner fantasy points. And the Eagles played a very bad Lions run defense last week. And this week, they play an even worse run defense in the Los Angeles Chargers. So I think Scott was given the first carries of the game last week. So I think he's the most likely to get his carries regardless of the score of the game. And so I think that's why you should put him in your starting lineup this week. And the wide receiver is Van Jefferson from the Los Angeles Rams. And basically the Rams have like 3 wide receivers right now. They have Cooper Kupp, they have Robert Woods, and they have Van Jefferson. Tutu Atwell's on injured reserve. They just released Deshaun Jackson. So I think for this week, Van Jefferson, he's out there a lot. Last 2 weeks, he's been out there almost as much as Kupp and Woods in terms of snap counts, and he's played pretty well. He's had 26.1 dynasty owner fantasy points over the last 2 weeks. So, and the Rams this week are playing Tennessee, who's not a very good pass defense, and so, I know Kupp and Woods are going to get their catches, but I think Jefferson should move right in there with them. Especially at the rate that Tennessee is allowing wide receivers to catch passes against them. So I'd get Jefferson in my lineup if I had him. And the final guy is Jordan Akins, the tight end from Houston. And I mean, making these picks is somewhat of a dart throw. I mean, I could add Freemuth because he's still technically outside the top 12, but I didn't think that was right. So I picked Akins because I think he's one of the more likely tight ends to sort of get a touchdown. And that's kind of how like these lowly tight ends get into the top 12 for the week, is they score a touchdown. 6 of the 12 guys who were in the top 12 last week for tight ends had a touchdown. And I think Akins is most likely to get it. Pharaoh Brown's still injured. Brown had a great game in week 1 with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback. And so I think it's probably more likely to be Akins than Brevin Jordan because Akins just plays more. So those are the 4 guys I think should be in your week 9 starting lineup. So next we're going to talk about guys who normally would be in your starting lineup, but probably should be on the bench or the practice squad this week. And first we're going to look at week 8, and we'll probably go through this pretty quickly because there were 2 bad recommendations and 2 just okay recommendations. Brady and Evans, I don't know why I picked them. Well, I know why I picked Evans. He was against Marshawn Lattimore, and he just beat him for a touchdown, and that's pretty much what he didn't do much else other than that one play. Brady had a great game, and he was tied for second best quarterback for the week. And the 2 ones were just okay. Antonio Gibson and CJ Uzomah. Their point totals look low, but they were actually okay bench options. I mean, they weren't so bad that you shouldn't have started them. Like Uzomah, he was less than 3 points outside of being a top 10 tight end, so not that far off. and Gibson was like the running back 35 this week, and so he's like very low end flex starter. So those are just okay bench recommendations. So on to week 9, and for bench recommendations this week, we've got Jalen Hurts from the Philadelphia Eagles. And if you think back to what I just talked about, Boston Scott, the Eagles are probably going to run the ball a lot this week. They should against the Chargers. They ran a lot last week against the Lions, very productive. They scored 44 points and won the game. Hurts only had 12.2 dynasty owner fantasy points because he had no touchdowns, and he only threw the ball 14 times. And I think it worked for the Eagles last week. I'm not sure why they wouldn't do it this week against the Chargers defense that's worse than the Lions against running backs. So if they do that, it should be good for the Eagles, but not so good for Jalen Hurts fantasy owners. So I'd have him on the bench this week. My running back bench recommendation is James Robinson from the Jacksonville Jaguars. And part of this is because he's possibly hurt. I think he's probably going to play. He did miss practice on Wednesday and Thursday. But, I think Urban Meyer, any reason he can have to get Carlos Hyde in the lineup, he's going to. And so Robinson being hurt and having gotten out of last week's game isn't going to help him get on the field this week. And then the second factor is that Jacksonville's playing Buffalo. Buffalo averages over 30 points a game. Jacksonville's scoring game this year is 23 points. Jacksonville's probably going to be behind. They're probably not going to be able to run the ball that much. So even if Robinson's in there, he's going to be more blocking and maybe catching passes. So I just wouldn't trust him and wouldn't start him this week personally. The wide receiver here is Mike Williams from the Chargers. And if you think back to like week 3, this would be unfathomable. I mean, Williams had 80 and a half dynasty owner fantasy points after 3 weeks. But since then, he had 1 great week against the Browns and 3 really bad weeks of 5 or less dynasty owner fantasy points. And I think he's going to get shadowed this week by Darius Slay from Philadelphia. And that's probably going to cause him not to be as productive. Slay's held 3 pretty good wide receivers the past 3 weeks to an average of just under 7 dynasty owner fantasy points per week. And so I just don't see it happening this week for Mike Williams. So I'd bench him, even though his contract is $15.68 million. Don't use your amnesty provision on him or don't drop him. Just bench him this week. And last, for the tight end, I have Kyle Pitts from the Atlanta Falcons. And Pitts, I mean, I know he's going to be the top receiver for Atlanta this week. But I think the Saints, they're playing the Saints. The Saints are pretty good at controlling the passing game. Matt Ryan usually doesn't play well against them, or at least he has in the last couple of years. And I just think they're probably going to try to put Marshawn Lattimore on him, I would think, if they're smart. I mean, who else are you going to put him on? I mean, the rest of their wide receivers are pretty dreadful with Ridley out. So I just think Pitts, I know he's had 1 good game over in London in week 5 against the Jets with Ridley out, but it was the Jets, let's be honest. So, and then last week against Carolina, he had only 3.3 dynasty on fantasy points with Ridley out. So I think probably should put Kyle Pitts on your bench this week. So, and finally, we have our matchup of the week, which is a very exciting matchup. It is our 2 teams. It's in League 76062. We've got John Boy's Bolts, which is a team that is currently ranked in 8th place in the chase for the ring. They're 7-1, and they're 1 game ahead of Bills Mafia in this league. And interestingly, Bills Mafia actually has Michael Thomas on their roster. So they're doing really well here at 6-2 with Thomas taking up like 15% of their salary cap. So in Bills Mafia, they're not hesitant to like make moves. I mean, they've made a lot of trades. They made a trade this week. They've made plenty of trades. They've used their amnesty provision, as has John Boy's Bolts. So I just don't see. I think Bills Mafia should probably take a look at who's available in their free agent auction and maybe move on from Michael Thomas. Regardless, this week they're projected to lose by just a little bit to John Boy's Bolts, which isn't surprising since John Boy's Bolts are playing very well. But as you can see from the score that's here, Bills Mafia already has 37 points, and John Boy's Bolts has just under 1 point. It's because Bills Mafia had Jonathan Taylor playing for them on Thursday night, and he had 35 points. So Bills Mafia is off to a great start. They're still projected to lose, but we'll have to check. You'll have to check and see on Tuesday in the recap article. You'll have to see whether or not who won the game. So that's it. Thank you very much for joining me for this video. Please, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, please smash the like button, like the video. It helps Dynasty Owner out. I would appreciate it. Please make sure to check out the other writers for Dynasty Owner. I've got Jay Pounds, who does a Monday Night Football preview, and then the free agent auction targets on Tuesday. And we've got Matt the Jerk. He's a great guy. He writes great things. He's doing an article series on opportunities by position. He tackled quarterbacks last week. Next week, I think he's going to do running backs. And then he does the Thursday night preview to start week 10 for us. And on Tuesday or Wednesday, I'll have the recap article for week 9. You can see how the matchup of the week went. You can see the top 10 in the chase for the ring. You can see the guys who you should have had in your lineup and the guys who you shouldn't have had in your lineup. Thank you for supporting Dynasty Owner. Thank you for watching this video. I appreciate it. And please hit me up on Twitter. It's @SteveBT33 if you have any questions, comments, comment on the video. And thanks for being a Dynasty Owner. Thanks for watching, and have a great day. Good luck this week. Bye.